You reach out and place your palm flat against the trunk of an oak tree, and for a second nothing seems to happen. No light, no sound, no obvious effect, just rough bark under your skin and the quiet hum of a park around you. Most people walk past 100 trees a week without ever touching a single one, and most videos on this exact topic will tell you it is about energy fields or invisible forces. The kind of claim that sounds mystical and collapses the moment you ask for actual evidence. I am not going to do that today. What I want to show you is what is genuinely happening in your nervous system, your stress hormones, your immune cells, and your brain when your skin makes contact with a living tree, backed by real research. Most people have simply never been shown, and once you understand the mechanism, this stops sounding like folklore and starts sounding like biology. Before we go further, if channels like Smart Psychology are the kind of thing that helps you understand your own body and mind a little more clearly, subscribing costs nothing, and it is what keeps videos like this one getting made, so take 3 seconds and do that now. And then let us get into what is actually happening under that bark. Let me start with why your body would care about a tree in the first place, because that question matters more than people realize. In 1984, biologist Edward Wilson at Harvard University proposed something called the biophilia hypothesis, the idea that human beings carry an innate, genetically rooted affiliation with living systems. Because for nearly the entire history of our species, survival depended on reading the natural world correctly, on knowing which plants were safe, which water was drinkable, which environments offered shelter, and which offered danger. Wilson argued that this dependency did not just shape our behavior, it shaped our physiology, wiring a felt response to trees, water, and greenery directly into the nervous system. This is not a poetic idea, it has been tested repeatedly, and the results keep pointing the same direction, that contact with natural elements produces measurable physiological changes, that contact with artificial ones does not. It is worth knowing where the modern research on this actually started, because the origin story explains why scientists took it seriously in the first place. In 1982, Japan's forest agency formally introduced the term Shinrin-yoku as part of a national public health initiative, responding to rising concerns about karoshi, a Japanese term describing death from overwork, and the broader mental toll of rapid urbanization that had pulled millions of people away from rural environments and into dense cities within a single generation. The government did not simply assume forest time was beneficial. It funded systematic physiological research to test the claim, and that funding is a large part of why Japan now leads the world in published studies on nature contact and human health. What started as a public health slogan became, within 2 decades, one of the most rigorously studied areas in environmental medicine, cited in peer-reviewed journals across immunology, cardiology, and psychology departments worldwide. Now, let me bring in the research that made this whole field credible in the eyes of mainstream medicine, the work of physician and immunologist Ching Li at Nippon Medical School in Tokyo. Li spent years studying a practice called Shinrin-yoku, which translates roughly to forest bathing, and what his laboratory found was not vague relaxation, it was a specific, repeatable immune response. Trees release compounds called phytoncides, natural antimicrobial oils such as alpha-pinene and limonene, as part of their own defense system against insects and pathogens. When people spend time among trees, breathing air saturated with these compounds and making physical contact with bark, leaves, and trunks, Li measured significant increases in the activity of natural killer cells, a category of white blood cell responsible for detecting and destroying infected or cancerous cells in the body. In one study, a 3-day trip that included direct forest contact raised natural killer cell activity by around 40%, and the elevated activity persisted for more than a week afterward. That is not a mood boost, that is a measurable shift in immune function, produced by proximity to trees and physical time spent among them. Alongside the immune findings, forest bathing research has consistently measured changes in the autonomic nervous system, the system that controls heart rate, blood pressure, and digestion without your conscious input. Studies coming out of Chiba University in Japan, led by physiologist Yoshifumi Miyazaki, compared groups walking through forest settings against matched groups walking through urban settings, and found that the forest groups showed meaningfully lower salivary cortisol, lower pulse rate, and lower blood pressure after the same duration of activity, along with higher parasympathetic nervous activity and lower sympathetic nervous activity, meaning the body was measurably shifting out of a stress-oriented state. These were not subjective mood surveys alone, they were blood pressure cuffs and salivary hormone assays, the same tools used in clinical medicine. There is a related finding that I think makes this even more compelling, and it does not even require touch, only proximity and visibility, which tells you something about how deep this response runs. In 1984, a researcher named Roger Ulrich published a study in the journal Science comparing recovery outcomes for patients recovering from gallbladder surgery in a Pennsylvania hospital, where some patients had a room with a window facing a stand of deciduous trees, and others had a window facing a brick wall. The patients with the tree view had shorter hospital stays, required significantly fewer doses of strong pain medication, and had slightly fewer minor post-surgical complications, all recorded from real hospital charts, not self-report. If simply looking at trees through glass produces measurable clinical outcomes, it becomes much less surprising that direct physical contact, full sensory engagement with texture, scent and proximity, produces an even stronger physiological signal. Here is the part that most people skip past, because they assume the benefit comes only from breathing forest air, when touch itself plays a separate and specific role. Your skin is not a passive covering. It is the largest sensory organ in your body, packed with receptors that respond to pressure, temperature, and texture, and these receptors feed directly into your nervous system. Research on tactile stimulation, including work from the Touch Research Institute at the University of Miami, led by Tiffany Field, has repeatedly shown that physical contact with a stable textured surface lowers circulating cortisol and activates the parasympathetic nervous system, the branch of your nervous system responsible for rest, digestion, and recovery. Bark is uneven, cool, slightly yielding in places, and rich in texture, and that kind of tactile complexity appears to engage the nervous system differently than smooth, artificial surfaces like plastic or glass. When your palm presses against something irregular and alive, your heart rate variability tends to increase, which is a marker of a nervous system shifting out of a stress state and into a calmer, more regulated one. There is another layer to touch specifically that rarely comes up in this conversation, and it involves the microbes living on the surface of the bark itself. Researchers studying what is sometimes called the old friends hypothesis, building on decades of work in the hygiene hypothesis tradition, pioneered by epidemiologist David Strachan, have proposed that modern humans, particularly in urban environments, are exposed to a far narrower range of environmental microbes than humans were for most of our evolutionary history, and that this narrowing is linked to rising rates of allergic and autoimmune conditions. Direct contact with soil, bark, and plant surfaces exposes your skin, and by extension your immune system, to a broader and more diverse microbial community than a typical day spent touching phones, doorknobs, and other indoor surfaces provides. This does not mean every tree you touch is doing dramatic immune recalibration in a single afternoon, but researchers in this field argue that repeated, low-level contact with natural microbial diversity may play a meaningful role in training a well-regulated immune system over time, particularly in children, whose immune systems are still calibrating what counts as a threat and what does not. There is also a quieter mechanism at work involving what happens below the surface of the forest floor, and I want to be careful here, because this is an area where the science gets exaggerated online, and I would rather give you the honest version than the viral one. Forest ecologist Suzanne Simard at the University of British Columbia spent decades mapping what she and her colleagues call the Wood Wide Web, a network of fungal threads known as mycorrhizae that connect the root systems of trees underground, allowing them to exchange carbon, nutrients, and chemical stress signals. This is real, published, peer-reviewed science, and it fundamentally changed how forest ecologists understand trees, not as isolated organisms but as members of a communicating network. What it does not mean, despite what some wellness content claims, is that touching a tree lets you tap into some kind of electromagnetic consciousness. What it does suggest is something more grounded, that trees exist inside deeply interconnected, chemically active systems, and that standing among them places your body inside an environment your physiology may still be calibrated to recognize as safe and resource-rich, a signal your nervous system appears to register even without your conscious awareness. While we are on the subject of claims that get exaggerated, I want to address grounding, sometimes called earthing, directly and fairly, because it comes up constantly in this conversation. The claim behind grounding is that direct skin contact with the earth, or with objects connected to it, including tree trunks, allows a transfer of free electrons that reduces inflammation and stabilizes the body's internal electrical activity. Some small studies, including work by researcher Gaetan Chevalier, have reported changes in inflammatory markers and sleep quality among participants practicing grounding. But the sample sizes in most of these studies are small. The mechanisms proposed are not yet well understood by mainstream physiology, and the research has not been replicated at the scale needed to draw firm conclusions. I am not telling you grounding is nonsense, and I am not telling you it is proven. I am telling you it sits in a genuinely uncertain category, somewhere between an interesting early signal and a confirmed physiological mechanism, and the honest thing to do is separate that uncertain claim from the well-established, heavily replicated research on forest contact, immune function and nervous system regulation that we just walked through, because conflating the two weakens the credibility of the parts that are actually well supported, and it is exactly that kind of conflation that lets skeptics dismiss the entire topic as pseudoscience when large parts of it clearly are not. If this kind of breakdown, separating what is proven from what is exaggerated, is useful to you, that is exactly the kind of thinking smart psychology tries to bring to every topic we cover. So if you have not already, this is a good moment to hit subscribe. And now let us talk about what all of this means for your brain specifically, not just your immune system. Psychologists Rachel and Stephen Kaplan at the University of Michigan developed what is now called attention restoration theory, based on the observation that certain environments replenish cognitive resources that get depleted by sustained focus and urban stimulation. Natural environments, according to their research, offer what they termed soft fascination, a kind of gentle, effortless engagement, the movement of leaves, the texture of bark, the dappled quality of light through a canopy that allows the brain's directed attention system to rest and recover. Multiple follow-up studies have found that even brief exposure to natural settings, in some cases as short as 10 to 20 minutes, improves performance on tasks requiring sustained attention and working memory compared to time spent in urban or indoor environments. Touching a tree specifically adds a layer of embodied, present-moment sensory input, the kind of grounding in the psychological rather than electrical sense, that pulls attention out of rumination and into the immediate physical world, which is itself a well-documented technique used in anxiety management and mindfulness-based interventions. This matters more now than it did even 20 years ago, because the gap between how much time we spend near trees and how much time our biology expects us to spend near them has been widening steadily. Journalist and researcher Richard Louv popularized the term nature deficit disorder in his book Last Child in the Woods, not as a formal clinical diagnosis, but as a description of the cumulative behavioral and attentional costs of her childhood and adulthood increasingly spent indoors and on screens. Surveys tracking American time use consistently show that the average person now spends the overwhelming majority of their waking hours inside buildings or vehicles, with outdoor unstructured time, the kind that would naturally include incidental contact with trees, shrinking across generations. None of the mechanisms described in this video require you to change your entire lifestyle, but they do explain why a small, brief, physical habit like this can produce a noticeable effect. Your baseline exposure to the thing your nervous system evolved expecting has dropped so low that even a few minutes makes a measurable difference. Let me also mention oxytocin, because this connects touch, trust, and calm in a way that is directly relevant here. Oxytocin is a hormone most associated with social bonding, released during physical touch between people. But research on touch more broadly, including contact with animals and stable natural objects, suggests that gentle, sustained physical contact can influence oxytocin-related pathways and lower activity in the amygdala, the brain region most responsible for processing fear and threat. This does not mean a tree trunk produces the same neurochemical response as a hug from a person you love. The effect size is smaller and the research is less extensive, but the directionality is consistent. Physical contact with a stable, non-threatening object tends to calm the nervous system rather than activate it, and trees, being large, rooted, and unmoving, appear to be particularly effective at this compared to less stable natural objects. At this point, you might reasonably ask whether any of this is simply placebo, People expecting to feel calmer around trees and therefore reporting that they do, and it is a fair question, one that researchers in this field have taken seriously rather than dismissing. What makes the forest bathing and touch research more credible than a typical wellness claim is that the outcome measures used were not limited to self-reported mood. Natural killer cell counts, salivary cortisol concentration, blood pressure readings, and heart rate variability are objective, mechanically measured values that do not require a participant to believe anything in order to change, and control groups walking through urban environments of similar physical exertion consistently show smaller or absent effects on the same measures. That does not mean expectation plays zero role. Expectation shapes most human experiences to some degree, but it does mean the effect cannot be explained by expectation alone, because a blood test does not know what you were hoping it would show. Now let me bring this together into something practical, because understanding the mechanism only matters if you actually use it. You do not need a 5-day retreat in a national forest to get a meaningful response, although the research does show that longer exposure produces stronger and longer-lasting immune effects. Even short, regular contact appears to matter. A daily habit as simple as placing your palm against a tree trunk for 2 to 5 minutes, ideally somewhere with actual trees rather than a single isolated street tree surrounded by concrete, appears sufficient to engage the tactile and nervous system pathways described in this video, and doing it consistently, rather than as a rare event, is what compounds the benefit over time, similar to how Ching Li's research found that the immune boost from forest contact faded gradually over roughly a month without repeated exposure, meaning this works more like exercise than like medicine, a habit that needs to be repeated to keep producing results. Try to choose real bark over painted fences or treated wood when you can, since the texture and chemical compounds involved are part of what the research measured, and try to do it without your phone in your other hand, since part of the attention restoration effect depends on your mind actually being present, rather than split between the tree and a screen. If you live somewhere without easy access to a forest, a single mature tree in a park, or even a large tree on a residential street, still provides meaningful tactile and psychological benefit. The research on urban trees specifically shows measurable stress reduction in city dwellers who spend even brief regular time near them. So this is not a habit that requires wilderness, it requires consistency. If you want to be specific about species, coniferous trees, such as pine, cedar, and cypress, tend to release higher concentrations of the phytoncide compounds most studied for immune effects, particularly alpha-pinene, which is part of why much of the original Japanese research was conducted in cedar and cypress forests, but broadleaf trees such as oak, maple, and beech still produce meaningful phytoncide output and offer the tactile and visual benefits regardless of species. Seasonal timing matters somewhat too, since phytoncide release tends to peak during the warmer months when trees are most metabolically active, though the touch and attention-based benefits described earlier appear to hold up across seasons, since they depend more on texture, presence, and sensory engagement than on airborne chemistry alone. None of this means you need to seek out a specific species growing in a specific climate. It simply means that if you have a choice between a young sapling in a planter and a mature stand of conifers a short walk away, the mature stand is likely to produce a stronger measurable response, though both are meaningfully better than no contact at all, and either one honestly takes less effort than most habits people spend far more energy trying to build. I think what makes this topic genuinely interesting is not that touching a tree is some hidden secret. It is that we already knew, on some intuitive level, that being among trees feels good, and what modern research has done is take that feeling and trace it back to actual mechanisms. Immune cells that respond to airborne compounds, a nervous system that calms in response to specific kinds of texture, an attention system that recovers in environments full of what psychologists call soft fascination, and a hormonal system that responds to stable, gentle physical contact, whether that contact comes from another person or from something as simple as a tree that has been standing in the same spot for decades, quietly running its own biology while yours responds to it without you ever having to think about it. So here is where I will leave you. Tomorrow, when you are walking past a park, a yard, or even a single tree on your street, take 15 seconds, place your hand flat against the bark, and just notice what happens in your body, the temperature, the texture, the stillness of something that has been growing quietly for longer than you have been alive. You are not doing this because of energy fields or invisible forces. You are doing it because your immune system, your nervous system, and your attention all respond to it in ways that have now been measured, repeated, and understood by scientists working in immunology, neuroscience, and environmental medicine across 3 continents. It costs nothing, it takes almost no time, and unlike most health advice you hear online, it does not ask you to buy a product, download an app, or change your entire schedule. It simply asks you to notice something that has been standing next to you the whole time, quietly running its own biology, while offering a measurable piece of yours back in return. If this video changed how you think about something as simple as a walk through a park, that is exactly what smart psychology is here to do: take complicated research and turn it into something you can actually use tomorrow morning. So subscribe if you want more of this kind of grounded, evidence-based look at the things we do without ever fully understanding why they work. And the next time someone tells you to go outside and touch some grass, you will know there is real, measured science standing quietly behind that advice, and I will see you in the next one.